Hi everyone, I'm Jamie Vaughn with CCM and I'm here today with artist Hope Darst. How are you, Hope?
I'm good. Thank you for having me, Jamie.
Absolutely, we're excited for you to come and talk to us today at CCM.
Oh,
So,
it's such an honor. I mean, I've been reading your magazine literally for years, so it's crazy to be on this side of it and
yep,
actually be one that's getting interviewed. So,
I know it was like that for me when I took the job here. So I've read this magazine forever and now I get to work here. So completely understand the excitement. So how are you? How is your family?
we're doing good. I think like everyone in America, we're like juggling and learning a new normal every single day. I mean, it's one thing when it started and then kids were home and it was summer and then it shifts again. And now like my kids are back in school. So I have one that's actually going in person and then I have one that's virtual at home. So we're kind of just juggling all the new normals like everyone else. And I think daily trying to figure out what that rhythm is, it just seems to change so much. And
Mhm.
and then I also decided, it was a perfect year for me to go back to work and release a record, all those things. So it's really good. A lot of new normals, new rhythms, and actually just having to ask the Lord to give us a blueprint for this season because
Yeah.
no one planned for this. You know what I mean? It's not like we were all sitting around and had like a plan on how do you deal with this. And so if nothing else, it's I think teaching me for sure, and hopefully a lot of other people like to just have to really lean in and trust God to give you wisdom for today and not even worrying about tomorrow or the next day. So, but we're doing good.
Yeah, good. So how have you filled your time as an artist through all of this?
Well, I was still making a record when everything kind of shut down. So we had not finished it. We didn't really wrap the record up until I guess about May. Um, so we kind of like my little pod of people, we like quarantined so that we could together, so then we could still like finish out the record. And so honestly, we were still doing that all the way up until June. And then by
Wow.
that, it was kind of summer. So then it was like take a little bit of a break and just try to like, be a mom and go to the pool a couple of days and that kind of stuff. And then it was just a lot of the details, the things that I didn't even know, like come with making a record. Cause I've just always been on the music side, a worship leader, a songwriter. I didn't know things about album packaging and social media and, press and interviews. That's all been so new.
Mhm.
So I just was kind of slowly kind of figuring out what has all come with putting out a record. Cause I think so many people think it's just the music, but
Mhm.
it's obviously so much more than that. And there's such a huge team that comes behind this dream to put out music or a vision to put out an album. And there's a lot of details behind the scenes that require just a normal
Mhm.
job like anyone else, like 9 to 5. So just trying to do all of that in the midst of now virtual homeschooling and all those things. But yeah, I've stayed busy. I was not sitting around watching endless amounts of TV. I was actually working quite a bit. So
So give our viewers your background story. They may not have heard of you yet, and I want them to know your heart and go listen to this album. It's so good. So I would love to hear your background.
yeah, I've had the most, I think, like unlikely story, and just like a such a it seems unique to me, my journey, because I turned 40 this year and I just signed my first record contract in January and I'm putting out my first record. It's not necessarily the most typical entry point in the season of life. I'm married 15 years on Wednesday. We have two daughters, 11 and 9. They're in sixth grade and fourth grade. And I think like most people, I just assumed very young that this would have happened 20 years ago, honestly. Like I was born, my mom said I came out the womb singing before I was talking. Like this was just something that I was just very early on knew that I wanted to do with my life. I wanted to sing, I wanted to make music. And I grew up in an era where I was watching all these amazing artists, and that's just what I wanted to follow in the footsteps of. And so by the time I was 20, that really had not happened. And so through a long series of events, I ended up moving to Nashville because the summer before my 20th birthday, I had a radical encounter with the Lord. And while I'd been saved my whole life, I didn't really understand lordship and like living for Jesus, where like your whole life is about how do I live to honor and love you in everything that I do. I had not really made that connection. And at 19, have this radical radical encounter with Jesus. And I'm like, okay, I'm all in. I'm whatever you want of my life, God, it's yours. And so I moved to Nashville because I just wanted to be a part of the church, where I actually got just this amazing moment with Jesus that changed my life and changed the direction of my life. I got married and did some music around, like I was, I would tour with people as a background singer or do session work or different things, but it never just really took off. Like, it just never really happened. And when I was 25, I felt so clearly that God just said, hey, I want you to lay that dream down. That's not what I have planned for you. And it was like, just devastating in that season because I didn't have a plan B. I wasn't like this person that was like, I've got a backup. This was the only thing I ever dreamed of. And over the next year, God ended up really redirecting my steps and calling me into full-time ministry, which I had never considered before. And I ended up going on staff at our local church, and I was a worship leader and a pastor and loved on people. And that's what I did for the next literally 10 years. And I never dreamed I would do anything different. Like, that became my entire life. Mm-hmm. But by the time I was around 33, my parents were walking through a really painful divorce. I had just had my second daughter. I had postpartum depression. I was on staff at a church. I was traveling every weekend leading worship. I'm trying to raise 2 small children. I'm going through hard stuff. And I just kind of broke down, to be honest with you. And it was like that second moment in my life that was a radical encounter with Jesus, where he came in and was just like, okay, Hope, like, you are saved. You love me, but you are not free. And I want to take you on a journey of freedom. And the last 7 years of my life have been that journey. And it's been in that journey where I ended up coming off staff. I ended up stopped traveling. Mm-hmm. And that year I was kind of in the process of making a small record, like a small EP, because I was traveling so much and I was on the road, and it just made sense at the time to have a piece of product on a table. And so simultaneously, I'm making this album while God's like doing this massive, deep work in me. And sure enough, for the second time, God's like, I'm not in that record. Like, if you want to do it, you can, but my plan isn't that record. That's your plan. And I had to make a really hard decision in that moment. We had invested time, energy, money, all kinds of things into this. And I had to make a decision, like, am I going to pursue a plan that's rooted in just passion, or am I going to be willing to walk away from it and actually pursue the presence of God? Because I very much want my life to be like Moses, in the sense of when he's having this conversation with God, and he goes, if your presence isn't with me, then I don't want to go. Mm-hmm. And that really, from that moment 7 years ago to even now and releasing this album, is rooted in, if your presence isn't on it, God, then I don't want it. If your presence isn't in it, then I don't want to be there. Like, if it's just not covered in you, then it's just a bunch of noise and symbols and things that don't make any difference in the long run. And so for the second time, I ended up walking away from something. And I, at that point, never imagined it would come back. Like, my whole mindset changed because God was just doing such a deep healing work of really rooting my identity in him, and not leading or pastoring or even songwriting or worshiping Jesus from this place of like, this is a check. Like, I'm checking this off to make sure that I'm a good Christian, or I'm checking this off to make sure I'm doing a good job and people are pleased with it, which kind of, unfortunately, was so much of what had kind of been in the background. And the Lord just began to do this deep, deep work for me. And it changed the course of my life. And I ended up being a part of our church's worship team, and they put out records, and I just focused on being a stay-at-home mom and loving Jesus and loving people and serving the local community and, all that kind of stuff. But about 3 years ago, God began to kind of allow me to step into the place of songwriting in a more like professional kind of way. And so I thought that was going to be the second half of my life, just writing songs, loving my family, raising my daughters, serving my church. I didn't dream for a second that God was going to open the doors for me to all of a sudden step back in to what had really been the first dream that I'd surrendered all those years ago. And so it's been such a total surprise, but it's also been kind of like this really kind season of me recognizing that, like, if God's written something over your life, then there's no expiration date on it. Like, it can still happen. It just may not happen when or how or why you think it should. And I know for me, I needed 20 years. I needed 20 years of God keeping me hidden so that if there was ever a season that I was seen, that he would be the thing that's seen in my life, not me. Like, I have no interest in people seeing me in this season or, putting out songs so that people think I'm a great singer or I'm a great songwriter. Yeah. I'm interested in actually putting something out that has the presence of God on it. And when people encounter it, they actually feel safe enough to be vulnerable with the Lord and allow the Holy Spirit to do a really deep work in their hearts and in their minds, the way that God's done in my life through the power of worship music and through the power of his presence. And so that's kind of my whole story and everything that I'm rooted in. Like, I'm so proud of this album and I'm so grateful for it. But at the end of the day, like, what I hope is that when people hear it, that they don't just fall in love with the songs and just think they're great, that they actually fall in love with Jesus and that they actually can sense this God that I am so passionate about and this Jesus that I know brings hope and healing and restoration to broken lives and broken situations, whether you're saved or not saved. I think so often it's like we want to paint the picture that Jesus just came to rescue the lost that don't know him ever. But sometimes even in our Christian walk, we get a little lost and we lose our compass and we lose our ability to, allow Jesus still in to go, like, there's no arrival. There's no like perfect point that we get to. And then we just don't need Jesus anymore. Like, we're going to always need him in this process. And so, the album is pretty much my journey over the last 20 years, but really specifically over the last 7 years.
So it's called Peace Be Still.
Yes.
Out. It's a great praise and worship album. I love the line, "Peace be still, you are here, so it is well." I just love that line. It spoke so much to me this morning. When somebody sits down and listens to this album, start to finish, what do you want them to walk away with?
I want them to walk away with an encounter with Jesus. I mean, I want them to be, the first track on the record is called Surrender. And it was a spontaneous moment that happened when we went into the studio. We brought in a live band. We all went in the room together to track about 7 or 8 of the songs off the record. Because I'm a live worship leader. I've not done studio.
That feel. It very much that feel.
And that was challenging because all I've ever done is lead live, and we weren't doing a live record. Right. Fingers crossed we'll get to do that in the future. But it was really important to me that on a debut, I didn't create an album that would give you a false idea of who I am live. Like, I really was like, how do we capture the essence of who I really am when I lead worship in a studio record? And we knew one of those approaches was to bring in the band that I lead with all the time, have them come in a big studio, us all get in the same room, and just kind of give everyone the freedom to just discover what these songs could sound like. Oh, I love it.
And there's a hurricane going on outside and she's upset. So.
It's real life right now. I love it. I'm a dog. And so because of that, like, they just stumbled on this moment where they were just playing these beautiful chords, and we just hit record. And it took us forever to figure out what the title of that was going to be, because it was always just the Set Free intro, because we had played it before we went into Set Free to track. And when we got to the kind of end of the record, when I was like, I have to turn in titles, guys. I remember just sitting back and feeling like Surrender was the right title, because I feel like that song, and I hope that song does, is it sets the listener up to recognize, like, this is an album that I want you to take a deep breath. Mm-hmm. And I actually want you to allow your heart and your mind a minute to settle in and go on a journey with me of these songs, and let them actually touch the places that Jesus so desperately wants to come in and heal, restore, rejuvenate, breathe new life into. Like, if you are struggling with fear, that you will walk away with peace. If you are struggling with feeling like promises have been broken and that you don't know, when, like, you feel like you can't see the goodness of God in a situation that you're in, you're going to feel that restored. If you feel like shame and condemnation from your past or even your present, that you remember you are actually called a new creation in Christ, that he has set you free, that the old has passed away. That when you get further into the record and there are songs like, let it out, that you feel something in you that's willing to just open your mouth and praise right in the midst of your circumstances, just like Joshua did at the wall of Jericho, and just like Paul and Silas did in the prisons, so that you can tear down walls in your own life and that you can press through with worship to break through.
Yeah.
Or the very last track on the record, which is called Start Over. And I wrote that was the last song we wrote for the record. We wrote it at the top of the year, and it was on the heels of a really, really hard fall in 2019. And I had just had some things kind of trigger my past, and just a wave of just some anxiety had come back up, and I was feeling frustrated that I was dealing with anxiety again. It'd been something that I've dealt with in the past, kind of where Peace Be Still started, was me dealing with fear and anxiety. And so I knew the victory that Jesus had already brought me in so many other seasons. And I was so stunned that this thing was kind of like coming back. And I remember just feeling like I had gone backwards, but also knowing, God, we've done so much work and I have so much history with you, and I trust you. I trust that if you're highlighting something that needs healing, it's for my good and it's for my future. But I knew there was also though this part of me that was just like, I just wish I could start over. I just wish we weren't here and this wasn't what we were dealing with. But I just felt in that moment that God was like, but Hope, you always get to start over with me. And I am safe for you to come and be vulnerable with. I am safe for you to sit with. I can handle your tears. I can handle the pain that you're walking through. But know that my job here and my goal here is to actually heal things that have gotten fractured over the years. And that's why I love the line that just says, you're not broken. There's just things I want to mend. And I hope that when people, if they get that far into the record, that it's a safe place for them to actually feel like they can be vulnerable and let Jesus in. So at the end of the day, I don't want people to just experience a nice record. Mm-hmm. I want people to actually experience the power of Jesus that I know happens when we choose to worship, or we choose to allow worship to create a space where the presence of God comes in and Jesus can change everything. So
as a songwriter, what's your favorite lyric that you've ever written?
Oh, it's in Start Over, actually, where it says, well, there's two. I should say there's two lyrics off this record. One would be in Start Over, where it says in the second verse, sometimes healing looks like nothing you would choose. Feels like you're in reverse. I think so often as Christians, we do kind of get a little bit trapped in that we think that we should just eventually get to a place of perfection where there should be no weaknesses left. There should be no, struggles. There should just only be forward motion. Mm-hmm. And I personally experienced sometimes healing with God means you have to go backwards before you can go forwards. Mm-hmm. And that wasn't the original lyric. There was a different lyric, and I never felt like it was right. I never felt like it painted what you actually feel when you're in those seasons, or it feels like you're going backwards. But in essence, God's actually just trying to take you back to the place where there was a fracture so that he can heal it, so that as you're moving forward whole versus moving forward limping. And then there's a line in the song, Don't Let Go, that says, I think it's also in the second verse, but it says disappointment can return to awe and wonder. And there have been some seasons in my life where there were things that just did not work out the way that I thought they were going to work out. And there was deep disappointment that came in those seasons. And, I think disappointment can go one of two ways. It can go down the path that leads to just bitterness and honestly distrust of the Lord. Or you can really take that disappointment to God and be really honest with him and say, this is painful. This is not what I expected. And I am hurting and I don't know what to do with this disappointment, and allow him to come in and just heal that place of disappointment, regardless of whether in the natural the thing turns around. And for me, I can tell you this album, this season is the awe and wonder of two previous seasons of being disappointed that it just wasn't what God asked me to do. It wasn't the plan. And there was disappointment in those seasons. There was also deep trust that God knew what was best for me, but it wasn't just okay, God, whatever you want, that feels lovely. It was painful. It was grieving. I had to grieve the death of dreams. I had to grieve the death of ideas of what I thought my life was going to look like. And but in the faithfulness and the obedience to just do the long journey with the Lord, the long yes with God, I'm now sitting in a season where, because I surrendered that disappointment, there is now such an awe and wonder at what God has done. And the awe and wonder even came before the record, to be honest with you. The awe and wonder came in just knowing that God didn't have to fulfill those promises. God didn't have to turn it around for me to think he was worthy of my whole life and my whole trust. But it can, like, disappointment can actually turn into a really beautiful thing if you let God in on it.
Yeah. Okay. So flip that question around. Is there a song or a lyric that you wish you had have written?
That I hadn't written?
That you have written, that a song someone else wrote that you wish you had have written?
Oh, okay, there's a lot because I love songs and I love words. I could say in general, I wish that I would have written Goodness of God by Jason Ingram and Jen Johnson. That song is so powerful and it's just so anointed. But I think if I were going to say, I really love Stephanie Gretzinger's new record. She has this one song that just talks about Jesus and that no one has ever loved her as well as Jesus. And I just think it's so beautiful and so gorgeous. And I'm just a huge fan of both of them as songwriters. So I'm glad they wrote the songs, but I wouldn't have been sad if I could have been in the room with them when they wrote them.
So as we're wrapping up our interview, is there a message of hope that you would like to leave with the CCM viewer?
Yeah, I think there's this scripture that talks about after you've suffered a while, God will strengthen you and he will give you hope. And I just think that sometimes we think the seasons of suffering are the end, like that there will never be a turnaround, that there will never be anything that actually, like, that feels so final, right? Like, loss and suffering, it can feel final and it can feel forever. I mean, the Israelites were in the desert for 40 years. Sometimes we are in seasons that feel hard for a long time. But what I know without a shadow of a doubt is that there's something that happens in the fire. There's something that happens in the valley. That is where gold is forged. That is where trust is birthed. That is where character is developed and perseverance happens, that ultimately leads to anchoring your heart in hope, of the hope of Jesus. And I think that if people just will hold on, honestly, if they'll just grab hold of Jesus and not give up and be willing to stay on the long road of trusting him, no matter how hard it is, no matter how long it takes, he will always come through. He will always do what he says he's going to do. He will always make good on his promises, and his word will not fail you.
Sounds good. All right, everyone. Hope Darst, Peace Be Still. It's out now. You can find it wherever you get your music. Hope, thank you so much for talking to us today.
Thanks for having me. It was an honor.
Absolutely.